In 2012, a teenage girl started hearing strange noises coming from the ceiling vent above her bed. At first, it sounded like normal house noises, probably just the house settling. But then, she heard someone whisper her name. She ran out of the room and told her mom, but her mom brushed it off. "Old houses make weird sounds," she said. "Don't scare yourself." But the sounds didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, things kept going missing. Snacks, milk, even a full pack of sandwich meat. Lights she was sure she'd turned off were suddenly on, and late at night she could swear someone was breathing above her. Then one night she was lying in bed. She looked up and saw something move behind the vent. She didn't wait. She called the police. When they arrived, they searched the attic. At first, it looked empty, but tucked behind the insulation. They found a sleeping bag, half-eaten food, and a 20-year-old man. He wasn't a stranger. He was her ex-boyfriend, someone her parents had forbidden her from seeing months earlier. He had broken into the house, climbed into the attic, and lived above her room for days. He carved peepholes into the vents to watch her, and scratched messages into the wood. One of them read, "I see you."
He became infamous as the world's youngest serial killer at only 8 years old. Amarjit Sada lived in a village in Bihar, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, Bihar, India, in 2006 with his family. In that specific village, there was a lot of poverty and there were a lot of families that lived there, most of whom seemed to be related in one way or another. And it was super common for kids to always be outside playing together. There was always a group of kids all throughout the village, talking, playing, walking, whatever it was. And one of those kids, a little girl, was always seen playing outside with her cousins, her friends, her neighbors, but she would always return home at the end of the day. Until one day she didn't, and people in the village noticed that they hadn't seen this one little girl outside long enough for people to start raising eyebrows, start asking questions. Around the same time, a newborn baby disappeared out of the blue, and when that baby was born, she was the light of that family. She was all that they would talk about. They loved her so much, but from one day to the other, she disappeared, and the family said nothing, and it was almost like the baby didn't exist at all. And from my understanding, it sounds like the village was one where everyone knew everyone, but also one where each family minded their own business. Like if something was going on, but it had nothing to do with you or your family, you didn't ask questions, you just kind of stayed away from it. Not long after, in 2007, a mom dropped off her 8-month-old baby at a local daycare for them to watch her for the day, but when she returned to pick her up, she disappeared as well. And her mother went into a panic. Of course she did. The entire day she had been under the impression that her daughter was safe and sound, being taken care of, but she just learned that she was missing. She immediately started telling every single person that she saw that her baby was missing, not only so they were informed, but so that everyone could be on the lookout for her. And also to ask around and see if anyone had any information about where she could be. Which is when she ran into a family member that was part of the Sada family, and she was frantic. She was explaining that she was freaking out, she was looking for her daughter, visibly distraught, confused, desperate. And then that person said, "I think I might be able to help you." So the mom, along with now the family member from the Sada family, go to the police, and then all of them, the mom, the family member from the Sada family, and the police start walking together towards a group of kids that was playing outside, and the family member from the Sada family calls Amarjit Sada. And I'm not sure what the exact relation was, but they were related. Amarjit Sada was an 8-year-old little boy, and they tell him that this little baby girl has gone missing. And they ask him if he has any idea of where she could be. Amarjit Sada responds that yes, he actually does. So they sit down for a chat, and the police ask the little boy to tell them what he knew. And Amarjit looked at them and said something to the effect of, "I know that she is dead because I killed her." He said it with no emotion on his face. The police said he actually kind of smiled and talked about how he had committed a murder at 8 years old as if it was, quote, nothing more than a chore, end quote. And the police didn't even know what to think. They didn't want to believe that this 8-year-old little boy could have been capable of ending someone's life. But then Amarjit walked them over to a field, and there he pointed at a shallow grave in which he had placed the deceased body. He told them that he had taken the baby from the local daycare when no one was watching. He walked her to a secluded area and used his own 2 hands to cut off her air circulation. But then he started explaining that it was kind of boring for him, that he was getting bored because he wasn't getting enough of a reaction. So then he grabbed a brick and he used that to create horrific blunt force trauma to his victim over and over again until they were no longer alive. This 8-year-old little boy was then taken to the police station, and it was while he was there that it dawned on everyone even more just how horrific this was, because they had this little boy sitting in this chair. His little legs were so small they were just dangling off the chair. They're getting ready to question him, and he's just sitting there smiling at everyone like he doesn't even know why he's there. He has no idea what they're about to talk about. And when they start talking about it, it's like he has no idea that it's something horrible that he just did. Before they start questioning him, he tells them that he doesn't want to talk unless they gave him some cookies beforehand, which they did. So they're looking at this little kid munching on some cookies, trying to make sense of everything. And like I mentioned, Amarjeet Sada was only 8 years old at the time of this case, and authorities would soon realize that that 8-month-old baby was not his first victim. The 6-year-old little girl who disappeared in 2006 was Amarjeet's cousin. She was 6 years old at the time, and Amarjeet was 7, and he had done the exact same thing to her. He took her to an isolated area, tried to cut off her air supply with his hands. He's looking down at her face that is literally changing colors because she isn't getting any air, but then he stepped away, he grabbed a rock and used that to brutally murder her. And then he went home and he told his mom and his dad what he had just done. And then eventually they told the uncle as well, which was the little girl's father, which I can't even begin to imagine that conversation. But he confessed like it was the most casual thing in the world. And again, he was 7 years old. So following his confession, after sitting on it, talking about it, discussing it, the family as a whole, the entire Sada family, so not only Amarjeet's parents, but also the extended family as well, aunts, uncles, etc., the Sada family decided that this was a secret that would stay between them. They were not going to report it, they were not going to announce it, they were never going to talk about it again because they didn't want to risk losing Amarjeet too. They wanted to protect him, so his parents punished him for what he did, but they kept it between them, kept this as a family secret, hoping to never talk about it again. And then a few months passed, and then Amarjeet did it again, this time to his own newborn sister. Their mom put the baby down for a nap. Amarjeet saw her, picked her up, took her to an isolated area, and murdered her, just like he had done to his cousin months prior. Their mom noticed the baby was gone, and she knew the first person they had to find was Amarjeet. They found him, and he confessed. He just told her what he did. And yet again, this was kept between the family. They didn't go to the police, they didn't report it. This was just another family matter. Which brings us to 2007, when a mom dropped off her 8-month-old daughter at a local daycare, and then Amarjeet claimed her as his third victim, ended her life in the exact same way, but this time his victim was not a part of his family. At the police station, Amarjeet Sada sat there, a serial killer at 8 years old. Authorities, under the strong belief that he'd suffered from psychiatric disorders for obvious reasons. He saw so many different psychiatrists, psychologists, all who diagnosed him with different things, one of the main ones being controlled disorder. He was also described as a sadist who took pleasure in the fear and pain of others. One of the psychologists also said that he was a psychopath. It was also concluded that he had a chemical imbalance in his brain, which is why his brain was wired in a way that made him enjoy the pain of others. At the station, Amarjeet reportedly told the police, quote, "She was sleeping in the school. I took her a little away and killed her with a stone and buried her," end quote. He was arrested and taken to court, where he was tried as a child. However, under Indian law, a child cannot be sent to prison or sentenced to death, but a child can be detained at a children's house until they turn 18. So that's what happened. He was sent to a house, a children's facility in a nearby town until he turned 18. He turned 18 in 2017, and his whereabouts are unknown. The fact that a kid became a serial killer at 8 years old is bizarre. The fact that that person is somewhere in the world right now just walking free is also insane. Yeah, like that's terrifying to me. But that is what I have for today's video. Let me know if you've heard about this before and what your thoughts are on it. But yeah, thank you guys for hanging out with me today, spending time with me today. Hope you're having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
The body of a newborn baby was just found in the closet of this 21-year-old cheerleader from the University of Kentucky. This case is extremely recent, so I don't have a lot of answers, but a lot of you guys have been asking me to talk about this, so this is what we know so far. Lakin Snelling is a 21-year-old pageant queen from Tennessee. She's also a cheerleader for the University of Kentucky stunt team. Lakin had just started her senior year at UK when on August 27th, 2025, so just about a week ago, 911 was called. Lexington police were called to Lakin's home, where they found the dead body of a newborn baby wrapped in a towel and a trash bag hidden in Lakin's closet. Lakin admitted to the police that she gave birth to this baby and then concealed any evidence of its birth by cleaning up the mess. She then hid all of the cleanup materials in a trash bag along with the body of the infant. As of right now, we don't have a cause of death for her baby, when her baby was born, or who called 911. But we do have a confirmation that Lakin is indeed the mother to this baby. 4 days later, on August 31st, Lakin was arrested on charges of abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and concealing the birth of an infant. For those charges alone, she faces up to 5 years in prison. She entered a not guilty plea on Tuesday and was released on a $100,000 bond and is currently at home with her parents in Tennessee. An autopsy is being done, and they plan on releasing the results of the autopsy along with the cause of death for her baby. And depending on the results of that autopsy, 21-year-old Lakin could be facing first-degree murder charges. Right now, it's unclear if Lakin knew she was pregnant before giving birth or if she was hiding the fact that she was pregnant. Ever since this news broke just a few days ago, people have been looking through her social media accounts to see if there was any clues. In June, Lakin posted these photos with her boyfriend, and some people suspect that this could be a maternity photo shoot. But let me know your thoughts on that. I did go on her social media account where these photos were posted. She did hashtags like couple photo shoot. She didn't hashtag maternity photo shoot. I also think maybe the reason she's holding her stomach is just because that's like the pose that they were put in, but let me know what your thoughts are. Lakin hadn't posted any photos or videos of herself on her social media since June, even though she was like pretty up to date with like posting photos of herself, and some people suspect that she hadn't posted since June to hide the fact that she was getting more noticeably pregnant. Her chilling last post on social media in June is this post where you can like learn about Lakin through emojis. And under goals, you can see a mother holding a baby. If there are no other charges brought against Lakin, she will be back in court at the end of this month. So definitely make sure you're following along because I will be sure to update you as soon as I hear anything. But until then, please let me know all your thoughts, theories, and opinions in the comments section because I'm really interested. And while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to each and every one of you that suggested that I cover this case because there were a lot of you that have been DMing, commenting, emailing me, asking me to cover this case. And that's all I have for this one. Please be a good person to your fellow person. I will see you guys all next time in my next video.
She was interviewed on TV about a killer on the loose, then she was murdered by him too. This interview is probably one of the most haunting moments of the Suffolk Strangler case. Honestly, it's just chilling. It was a cold winter in 2006 in Ipswich in the UK. Now, it wasn't actually a normal winter because whispers had been going around about these women that had been going missing in the local area. London Road had been a bit of a problem because it had basically turned into like Ipswich's version of the red light district. Women who were struggling with substance addiction were basically turning to S work to fund their habits. It was one of those areas that you basically would avoid like the plague unless you were a pervy man. So suddenly these S workers started going missing, and the first one was actually 25-year-old Gemma Adams. Tragically, just weeks later, her body was found in a brook. The cause of death was strangulation, which is obviously such a horrific up-close and personal murder. Then, shortly after that, a 19-year-old girl called Tanya Nicol also was found dead. She'd gone missing just after Gemma had, and her cause of death was exactly the same. Then the locals were terrified when a third woman went missing. This was a Nellie Alderton, who was in her early 20s too. It was actually obviously pretty clear now that a dangerous serial killer was on the loose and he was targeting very specific women. The previous deaths had been horrific, but Annelie's was just absolutely like something from a horror film. She'd been strangled and then posed deliberately. Her arms were put in like a crucifix, almost like it was some sort of like ritual, or the killer was trying to terrify everybody. Obviously TV crews got wind of this and they were all over it like a rash. I mean, like a terrifying serial killer was on the loose in the UK. They were out interviewing locals, specifically S workers, to see, you know, were they too scared to carry on doing what they were doing? And one woman they interviewed was Paula Clennell. She was 24 and she was actually a really funny, caring woman. She again was an S worker with a substance habit, really sadly. I mean, these people are human at the end of the day, and a lot of the time they just fall into this kind of way of life because of horrific traumas that they've gone through. She desperately wanted to get out of the cycle that she was in, but she really could see no way out. She actually had got 3 children and they'd all been taken off her because of her way of life. In her interview, the interviewer asked her, you know, are you not too scared to carry on being an S worker in this area? And she seemed really nervous, and she admitted that yeah, she was scared. She was wary about getting in people's cars, but honestly, she needed the money. Just days after this went out on TV, she vanished too. Tragically, Tragically, on the 12th of December, she was also found dead on wasteland just outside of Ipswich. But it didn't stop there. Another woman, Annette Nichols, was then found dead too. And this was absolutely terrifying. Obviously, this was just bodies piling up and up. It led to a huge police search. It was actually one of the largest manhunts in UK history. And police worked out that the killer was obviously likely to be a male, and also likely to be somebody who was kind of in the local area. Like, this was very specific to one area. He was clearly targeting people that he knew were vulnerable. They scoured CCTV footage of the local area and took the DNA from the bodies of the victims. And this led to one man, Steve Wright, a local forklift truck driver. Now, he lived very close to London Road, and he was also known to regularly frequent the red light district. He was arrested in mid-December, and forensics just really confirmed what police thought. He was the guy. Fibers from his clothing, his car and his home linked him to all of the victims. And it wasn't a massively long trial. He really didn't have a leg to stand on, to be honest, and in February 2008 he was found guilty of all 5 murders and given life without parole.
I can guarantee that nothing will make you lose more sleep than when you look into what happened to this man right here. Because not only was he found dead, hogtied in his own basement, but he was stabbed 22 times and tortured for hours before he died with his own kitchen knives. Authorities say what he went through was worse than what anyone could ever imagine, but the worst part, the only suspect is an unidentified man who had just rented a room from him. When he filled out his rental application, everything that he wrote down about himself was fake, and he went by the alias Robert Cooper. Only a couple of people saw Robert face to face, and this killer meticulously planned the entire thing, going to great lengths to hide his identity. But at the same time, he was incredibly ballsy. Not only was he caught on CCTV at an ATM, but evidence shows that he stayed at the scene of the crime, aka this guy's house, for days, eating food from his fridge, showering in his shower, sleeping in his bed, and even wearing some of his clothes. This is the disturbing and mysterious death of Oki Al-Kite. Whoever did this to him has seemingly vanished into thin air, getting away with a horrific crime. But according to the police, he has likely killed before and will kill again if he hasn't already. So let's talk about it. This is Oki Al-Kite. He lived in Aurora, Colorado, and was a really warm and loving person. He had no enemies, and overall, he was just a beacon of light to anyone who knew him. In early May of 2004, Al decided that he wanted to rent out a room in his basement. He lived in a pretty big townhouse all by himself, and he figured that he didn't need the room and would enjoy the extra income. So he posted an ad online and in the newspaper stating that he was looking for a roommate. He didn't get a lot of bites at first, but then out of the blue, a man named Robert Cooper responded to the ad on May 19th. Robert was really interested and wanted to move in almost immediately, so Al invited him over to check the place out and get a feel on him. So that day, Robert came over and he told Al that he had recently moved to Colorado from the East Coast. He was now working at a Wells Fargo and he was living with his sister, but now he needed to find a place of his own. Robert and Al kind of hit it off, but just to be sure, Al secretly invited his new girlfriend Linda over to meet Robert as well, seeing as though he was considering being roommates with him. Al and Linda had been dating for a couple of months, and so they were definitely in that sweet honeymoon phase. They seemed to hold a lot of love for each other, but anyway, Linda suddenly came over that day, and when she walked through the door, she found that Al and Robert were in the basement. Before heading down there, Linda used the bathroom really quick, but this is where things start to get strange and red flags start flying. So hearing that someone was now upstairs, Robert quickly left the townhouse. Just as she was exiting the bathroom, Linda saw Robert walking away. She never saw his face, just the back of him, but he appeared well dressed, between the age of 30 and 50, and she noticed that he walked with a limp and used a cane. Keep this detail in mind because it is really important later. Although it was a little odd that Robert suddenly left after hearing someone else in the house, Al and Linda kind of just brushed this off and went about the rest of their day. This brings us to May 22nd, 2004. It was a beautiful Saturday morning when Al drove Linda to the airport. She was going out of town to see some family, and on the ride there, Al was in a great mood, as per usual. Al called her once she landed on her layover, the couple still smitten with each other. And at this point, nothing was amiss. Then at around 3:30 p.m., Al calls one final time, and this is when she finally got to her destination. On this phone call, Al was really subdued and short, which was out of character for him. It almost seemed like he was upset about something, which she didn't know why because he was about to meet up with his new roommate, Robert. And the very next day, he was going to go golfing with some of his best friends, but Linda didn't push it, and the call eventually ended. Little did she know that within the next few hours, Al would be brutally murdered in his own basement. So a few days would go by. It's now May 25th with no word from Al, and at this point, he'd missed a few days of work. Al was normally very reliable, so this was really unusual for him, and it was so out of character that his coworkers called the police to actually conduct a welfare check on him. When police arrived, they knocked on his door a few times but received no response, and worried that something was wrong, they let themselves inside. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. They searched the house for Al, but initially couldn't find anything. That is, until they made their way into the basement. The basement was covered in blood, and in the middle was Al. He was very obviously deceased, and he had been hogtied with some cords. It appeared that Al was basically slaughtered. He had been beaten and stabbed 22 times with his own kitchen knives, and he was almost decapitated. Evidence at the scene and the state of his body suggested that he'd been tortured for hours before his death, sustaining multiple stab wounds to both of his eyes and his ears, and then down through his shoulder. His whole body was beaten, but his face and feet took the most of that damage, and it was determined that he had deliberately been tortured slowly with several different kitchen knives to prolong his pain. Al also had a major wound to the back of his head, and this is when police started piecing together what exactly happened. It looked like someone had hit Al really hard in the back of the head with an object as he was walking down the basement stairs. So police began searching his house for any clues, and this is when they noticed the sink in his basement. It was plugged and filled with bleach, and soaking in that bleach were 12 of Al's kitchen knives, a drinking glass, a pen, a dish sponge, and Al's very own car keys. The entire house had been deep cleaned to scrub away any potential evidence, and whoever did this really knew what they were doing. What's so incredibly disturbing is the fact that authorities found evidence that the killer stayed in Al's house for 36 hours, eating food from his kitchen, taking a shower in his bedroom, sleeping on Al's bed, and even went through his closet and wore some of his clothes, all while Al was laying dead in the basement. What's crazy though is that this house was so thoroughly cleaned that the killer even poured bleach down the shower drain. Police began questioning who could be responsible for such a heinous act, and at first they thought that this could be a robbery gone wrong type of situation. Al had a lot of valuables still laying around the house, but at first glance, his phone, wallet, and his truck were all missing. This is when police found a crumpled up rental application in Al's garbage can. It was all handwritten, and the applicant's name read Robert Cooper. Robert listed all of his personal information, from his phone number to his current address to even his social security number. So police figured this would be a good place to start, but when they looked into this Robert Cooper, they found that he did not exist. The name was completely fake, the social security number belonged to a woman who had no idea what was going on, and the current address was traced to the University of Colorado's medical school campus, which seems random, but this is another important piece of information to remember. Police found that the phone number listed was actually a burner phone that was bought at a 7-Eleven right off the university's campus 30 days prior. This was a good lead, so police began tracking the burner phone and Al's phone and found that they were both moving in the same direction, to Denver. Not long after, the burner was located in a homeless community, while Al's phone was located in a nearby payphone booth. Evidence on Robert's burner phone showed that he had called several other renters/landlords in the area looking for a place to live. Some of those renters had only placed ads on the university's campus, not online, not even in the newspaper, and this proved to be one of the only leads in this case. So this is when authorities interviewed everyone who knew Al, his girlfriend Linda, his neighbors, and even his co-workers, hoping to find more information on this Robert guy. According to Al's neighbors, Robert really creeped them out, and they would try to talk to him in the short amount of time that he was at Al's. Robert would either completely ignore them or just turn away from them so that they couldn't see his face. One of his neighbors said they ran into him on a nearby trail, and this time he didn't have a limp or a cane. To them, this man looked to be in his 40s or 50s, around 5'10" and roughly 180 pounds. He had fair skin and a Romanian accent. As this was all happening, Al was completely unaware of what his new roommate was doing. His neighbors said that it seemed likely that Robert came by the day he was killed to drop off his rental application, and the last time they ever saw him leave the house was Sunday, the day after he was killed. Linda gave her description to the police, but it was tough because she'd only seen Robert that one time, and only as he was leaving. She never fully saw his face, she only noticed that he was walking with a limp and a cane. She did mention her last phone call with Al though, and how he seemed subdued and like something was bothering him. It's left many wondering where Robert was at the time of this call, and whether or not Al was being actively tortured while on it. Some think Robert was telling Al what to say to appease Linda and not bring any attention to himself. Another person who did actually come face to face with Robert, though, was a University of Colorado languages professor. Just before Al started looking for a roommate, she was as well, and Robert had actually responded to her ad first. She showed him her house just a couple of weeks before the murder took place, but she got really bad vibes from him. She said Robert's behavior was really unnerving. He would avoid eye contact and would obsessively inspect her windows while she talked. She decided to trust her gut instinct and reject him as an applicant, which now it's a really good thing she did. This professor said that when she had contact with Robert, he didn't walk with a limp or a cane, but he definitely had a Romanian accent. 3 other landlords came forward, all of which were approached by Robert, who was looking for a room to rent. They all said he acted differently. Each encounter, he had different characteristics, accents, and mannerisms. Sometimes he would walk with a limp and a cane, and sometimes he wouldn't. So this led authorities to question if any of it was actually true, and how much of it the killer made up in order to conceal his true identity. Not long after Al's body was found, police found his truck parked a block and a half away from his home. They found an ATM receipt at a local Wells Fargo, used after Al was already dead. Authorities were able to locate which ATM the killer used, and they were actually able to obtain this image of Robert. He was wearing a ski mask and gloves and was very clearly driving Al's truck. During this ATM visit, Robert withdrew $1,000 from Al's checking account, and this is another point of contention in this case. Al had a lot more than just the $1,000 in his account, so one of the biggest questions in this case is why didn't the killer take all of it? This is the main reason that authorities have ruled out a robbery gone wrong. If it was, the killer would have taken a lot more, maybe even everything Al had. Whoever Robert actually was, he had very meticulously planned this entire murder out, and although he went to great lengths to try and hide his identity, he made one major mistake. He left a couple of fingerprints and a few traces of his own blood at the crime scene. Authorities were able to use his DNA profile to link him to the Balkan area in Europe, and this was backed up by the witness testimonies. This, along with the CCTV footage of Robert, authorities were able to utilize DNA phenotyping with the help of Parabon nanolabs. With all of this information, they were able to figure out what his physical appearance is most likely to be, which is what you're looking at right now. And although we still don't know who Robert actually is, authorities have used genetic genealogy to identify a distant cousin in the Balkans, so now we just have to wait and hope for a match. As of today, we still don't know who did this to Al and why, but there are 2 main theories. Theory number 1 comes from Paul Holes, a former cold case investigator. He believes that Robert is associated with the Turkish Hezbollah, which is a Kurdish Islamist militant group that was active mainly in the 1990s in southeastern Turkey. Al's killer used a method of foot whipping as a form of torture on him that is very similar to the techniques used by this group. The only other theory is that Robert simply planned this crime and killed Al for the sake of killing him. If it wasn't Al, it would have likely been one of the other landlords in the area, and the only real motive for this crime is that he wanted to just brutally kill someone. This seems the most likely to me because of how random this was. Al had no enemies. He was super compassionate and trusting, and unfortunately, this killer took advantage of that. The only thing police know for sure, though, is that Robert has more than likely killed before Al, and they think that he may even be a serial killer with how much planning he put into this, and they fully believe that he will likely kill again if he hasn't already. It's just crazy to me that this person patiently set up the groundwork for this crime, left behind DNA, chose a townhouse to commit this brutal crime, fully knowing it shares a wall with neighbors, and then was even caught on CCTV, yet he still got away. And the fact that several people came face to face with him, yet he was somehow able to completely change his appearance and accents with every single one of them. How this murder is still unsolved is beyond me, but it's creepy to think that someone this calculated, this evil, this willing to plan out something so horrendous is still out there, waiting to strike again. But it's now been 21 years, and whoever killed Al and why he did it remains a mystery.
Who would think selling unlimited 10-cent beers to sports fans is a bad idea? Not the Cleveland Indians when they played against the Texas Rangers on June 4th, 1974. This led to 60,000 cups of beer being sold to the 25,000 people in attendance. That was incredibly problematic because there were only 50 security guards. Fans were growing increasingly intoxicated, throwing bottles and firecrackers on the field. There were flashers and streakers. And this all culminated in the 9th inning when a fan tried to steal a player's cap and the Rangers came to their teammates' defense. The fans rushed the field with knives, chains, and stolen stadium seats. Players defended themselves with bats as they retreated
into their dugouts, and the umpire declared the Rangers the winner by forfeit. Though they would put a 2-cup per person limit, the next 10-cent beer night was a month later.
Epstein would say it flat out, the younger the better, and the more that you would allow him to do to you, the more that you would do to him, the more money you would get. Everything about him feels so mysterious, and the people who are still alive and around to tell his story are not willing to say the full truth. And here's the thing, there's people that deserve to be talked about as often as this guy is. He is not one of them. With all this new information coming out and everything about Epstein that's currently on the headline news, I thought we would do a recap, just so we're all on the same page, so we all understand what's going on, what kind of guy we're talking about here. I do have a full deep dive on my podcast linked in my bio if you haven't listened to that. That episode is 45 minutes long, but today we're just going to do sort of a recap on who Jeffrey Epstein is. Jeffrey Epstein was the eldest of 2 children. His mom was a stay-at-home mom and his father worked for the New York City Parks Department. The family grew up in a neighborhood called Seagate in Brooklyn, New York. And ever since he was little, Epstein was smart. He loved numbers, he loved math, he did good in school, he liked school, and he had a very clear vision for his future. Simple goal: to be successful and to make a lot of money. He graduated high school in 1969. He went on to one college, then transferred to NYU. He was there for 3 years and left, never finished his degree. At 21 years old and with no degree in 1974, he became a teacher teaching math and physics at the exclusive Dalton School in Manhattan. He wanted to work there, to teach there, because the wealthy kids went there. He wanted to have access to them. He wanted to make connections to America's wealthiest families who sent their children to that school. And 2 things stand out in regards to his time there. One, that students always claim that Epstein paid more attention to the female students and was really creepy and weird around them. But 2, that his intentions of crossing paths with wealthy people worked, because it was thanks to one of the students' parents that Epstein was able to land a job at Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns was a major American investment bank and financial services firm. Epstein then worked as a trader and financial analyst at Bear Stearns for 5 years. Then, when he was around 27 years old in 1981, he left to go do his own thing. And what exactly did he do? In simple terms, I guess Epstein claimed that he was basically a wealth manager. He helped rich people manage their money, manage their finances, but he was always sus, because remember I said he was always very book smart, but he never got a degree. Somehow he was able to get his foot in the door just by making the right connections, but sus, because he never had an office, he never had a list of employees, a client list, or any official records of investment for that matter. He did that for a couple of years until 1988 when he launched his own consulting firm, J. Epstein and Company, and one of his most prominent clients there was billionaire Leslie Wexner. Leslie Wexner was the founder of a business empire, the business empire that owned Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, Abercrombie & Fitch, etc., etc. He's still alive actually. He's 87 years old, and according to Forbes, his net worth is over $9 billion, billion with a B. So Jeffrey Epstein starts managing his money, but he doesn't only benefit from that, he also benefits from the status. And then all of a sudden, Epstein is seen hanging out with the wealthiest of the wealthy and is often seen in these elite circles. And what does it mean for someone like Jeffrey Epstein to be buddy-buddies with Leslie Wexner? Well, it meant that he now had an unusual access to Victoria's Secret and Victoria's Secret models. And it's around that time that Jeffrey Epstein then starts bringing in girls from all over the world, all over the country. I'm talking 13, 14, 15-year-old girls with the fake promise of making them Victoria's Secret models. He would lure these girls in under false promises, at times moving them into his houses in New York, his house in Palm Beach, his house in Paris, and New Mexico. And he would use them for his own pleasure. He would ruin them and he would drain them from everything that they were. Fast forward to 1998, Epstein is now in his mid-40s when he purchases his private island, Little St. James, in the US Virgin Islands, which he liked to refer to as Little St. Jeff's. The island itself spans from 70 to 78 acres, and he reportedly bought it for $7.95 million. He buys it and basically gives it a makeover, building different cottages all throughout, adding a swimming pool, multiple swimming pools, tennis courts, importing 40-foot tall palm trees, a private helipad, you named it. Everything that you can think of was on that island. He also hires staff members on his island for literally anything that you can think of, and his staff members would later say that one of the weird things, because a lot of weird things happen on that island, one of the weird things is how many underage girls were seen constantly coming and going. Some of the pilots said that underage girls were seen routinely flying in and out of the island. But Epstein, his staff members, and the girls that he was routinely flying in and out of the island, it does not even begin to cover how much traffic the island got. Because Epstein would also invite his friends there, business partners or acquaintances, whatever, and for what reason, we can't be certain, but we can assume. And based on some of the flight logs, allegedly, we know, or we can assume, that some of the people who visited the island at one point or another included people such as Bill Clinton, Michael Jackson, Jackson, Rupert Murdoch, Leslie Wexner, Courtney Love, Janice Dickinson, Ted Kennedy Jr., etc., etc. Ghislaine Maxwell, she was also a person who frequented the island. She was Epstein's supposed girlfriend, but she was basically his right-hand woman. And one of Ghislaine's main jobs was to recruit and essentially manage the girls who were brought onto the island. She would coordinate all travel to the island and then manage their schedules, which meant scheduling massages that they were to give to Epstein. And those massages was just something to call them to cover it up for what it really was, and what it really was full-blown SA. Ghislaine Maxwell was born in France, and she was born into wealth. She was a billionaire's daughter, and I'm talking wealth, like money. Like her childhood home had 51 rooms, if that tells you anything. She grew up attending lavish parties, big events, fancy dinners, galas, grew up around politicians and celebrities, the whole thing. But then in 1991, she lost her father. Ghislaine's father mysteriously drowned off the coast of the Canary Islands after falling from his $15 million yacht. Weeks later, their house is mysteriously burned to the ground, and shortly after, it's discovered that her father had been stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from employee pension funds. And in Ghislaine's eyes, her life in London is ruined. The reputation is ruined. So in 1991, she moves to New York with the goal of finding the life that she is used to living, of luxury and power, on her own. And she puts in a lot of effort into gaining status in New York, which honestly doesn't take that much effort because she had a lot of connections. For example, she was good friends with Prince Andrew. She had connections, but anyway, she throws herself into this world of the rich and famous and powerful, which eventually lands in her path crossing with Jeffrey Epstein's. And we know for a fact that the two of them were in a romantic relationship, but sooner than later, Ghislaine became Epstein's go-to, who would help him with anything and everything, including recruiting girls under false promises. It was a common thing for Ghislaine Maxwell to be out and about looking for girls for Epstein. She would basically shop around for girls, shop around for victims, and then she would approach them and play this sick and twisted game of kind of like a big sister or motherly role and say, oh my god, you are so beautiful, you have so much potential. How would you feel about becoming a Victoria's Secret model? I know just the person who can make that happen. And by the way, it wasn't always becoming a Victoria's Secret model, because they had this little sick and twisted routine of selling victims different dreams, whether it was paying for their college, offering them their dream job, their dream internship, or introducing them to the right people in any kind of industry. Whatever lie they needed to say to lure these girls in, they would say. For example, one of the victims was an aspiring massage therapist, and Ghislaine offered her a job to provide private massages to Epstein, and that led to traveling to Epstein's private island, Little St. James, where she was later SA'd. They would tailor their story for each victim, and more oftentimes than not, they would target girls who were in some kind of need or want for money. And then Ghislaine Maxwell would manage to get these girls to one of Epstein's properties until eventually they got wrapped up and began this regular schedule of quote-unquote massages for Epstein, and one thing led to another, and the girls would be SA'd and treated like nothing more than a piece of trash. And they would be left with nothing but trauma that would last a lifetime. And by the way, this happened in all of his different properties in all different kinds of the world, as well as on the island. In 1996, Maria Farmer was the first victim to accuse Ghislaine as well as Epstein of SA. She went to the New York City Police Department, even speaking to the FBI, saying, this is what's happened. I know everything about Epstein. I know everything about Ghislaine and what they do and what they're actively doing, because I was a victim and I'm willing to tell you everything that I know. And they pretty much were like, no thanks, completely disregarding her. And now we have to talk about what Ghislaine and Epstein set out to gain from their victims, because it wasn't only to engage in these acts with Epstein and his friends. The victims were also expected to gather information from Epstein's friends to report back to Epstein and Ghislaine. They were told that they had to pay attention to anything and everything that the men said, men such as politicians, celebrities, CEOs, people of power, because then they were expected to report back to Epstein so that Epstein had all of this information against his friends that he could use as blackmail. On top of that, it's also been rumored that every single inch of every property that he owned, including the island, were covered with hidden cameras and microphones. Why? So that Epstein would have dirt on all of these powerful people, so that he had the upper hand, because that's all he cared about. In March of 2005, in Palm Beach, Florida, a 14-year-old girl is sitting in her school counselor's office when she confesses to being SA'd by Jeffrey Epstein. She tells her school counselor that she had been taken to a mansion in Palm Beach by an older girl that she knew. She was introduced to Epstein, told that she could give him a massage in exchange for money, and the more that she did, the more money that she could make. She was then told and encouraged by Epstein to bring her friends next time, and he said the younger the better. Following that confession, Epstein is arrested, investigated, and taken into custody. He accepts a plea deal, allowing him to plead guilty to lesser charges and in return is sentenced to 18 months. However, he only serves 13 months in a county jail. But during his sentence, he is allowed to leave to go to work for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. But then comes 2018. The Miami Herald publishes a year-long investigative series exposing everything, most notably exposing the full details of Epstein's plea deal, and in turn bringing up the many stories of many victims who had never spoken publicly about their experience with Epstein. And then on Saturday, July 6th of 2019, Jeffrey Epstein is arrested by the NYPD and the FBI as he walked off his private jet and back onto US soil from his travels. He's arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit and girls and was being held in New York in custody awaiting trial. And while in custody, he's absolutely losing his mind. He's going insane, and I'm talking insane. Like, he's sitting in his cell, rocking back and forth, whispering things to himself, not doing well. He was so noticeably unwell that he was put on watch to make sure that he wouldn't do anything to himself. However, he's arrested Saturday, July 6th, and August 10th, so just a little bit over a month after his arrest, Epstein is found deceased in his cell. His death ruled an unaliving. However, this is highly controversial. Either you believe that he did do it to himself or you don't, and you think that foul play was involved. And new information has come to light. New information keeps getting released. I'm talking like earlier this month in September, which is why I'm making this video, but let's backtrack for a sec. As far as his death being ruled an unaliving, people who agree with the ruling think that Epstein would do that because he wanted to take his secrets to the grave. But many others think that foul play was involved and that somebody did that to him. So let's talk about the reasons why. First of all, no photos were taken of Epstein's body before it was moved, which is weird. Secondly, the guards who were supposed to be checking on him every 30 minutes were not checking on him and instead confessed to falsifying records saying that they did when they really didn't. Third, the cameras surrounding his cell were not working, which is one of the things I want to talk about, so hold on. But very quickly, fourth, he was also supposed to have a cellmate, but his got transferred and he didn't get a new one. And fifth, the fact that Epstein's brother got a second autopsy done, and according to him, the results from the second autopsy that they got done showed that his injuries did not align with his death being ruled unaliving. But let me know what your thoughts are on that because I'm curious. But Epstein is arrested. Ghislaine Maxwell goes on the run, but she's arrested by the FBI in 2020, facing multiple charges to her role in facilitating everything that Epstein did. In 2021, she's found guilty on 5 out of the 6 federal charges and is sentenced to 20 years in prison, meaning her release date would be in 2037. And in court, Ghislaine states, quote, "It is the greatest regret of my life that I ever met Jeffrey Epstein," end quote. Okay, so that's like an overview of the case. If you always see, like, I'm sure every single one of you has heard Jeffrey Epstein's name, but if you don't know why or how, that's kind of the backstory on his lore, I guess. But like I said, new information is being released on what feels like the daily, and I have to still catch up on everything that has been released. I know that earlier, like maybe last week, 33,000 pages of documents were released, but apparently only fewer than 1,000 were new information released to the public. I have to look into that. But the reason why I'm making this video is because a lot of the reason why people think that he didn't unalive himself is because there was missing camera footage. However, surveillance footage has just been released of a previously missing 1-minute clip showing outside of Epstein's cell the night he was found deceased. So when people were saying that maybe someone snuck into his cell and that's why the cameras weren't working because it was a big cover up, that missing footage has now been released. So that theory is now out. I've also been seeing so many clips on my For You page of survivors and victims coming out to finally say their full story and finally publicly speaking about everything that they endured, which is amazing. And I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I know what's going on with the survivors and the victims and everything like that. I still need to look at what has been said and what is planning to be done, if anything. But I just kind of wanted to give you guys an overview of this entire case because it's nuts and it feels like it's never ending. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you have read or seen or heard. Again, the last thing that I would ever want to do is spread false information, which is why I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I've read things that I haven't or that I've heard things, whatever the case is. But I am eager to chat about this case in the comments. So that is all I have on Epstein. Let me know your thoughts on it. And yeah, thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
Was the 9th woman in history to ever be put on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. She was so obsessed with her ex-boyfriend that she would kill to get him back. Growing up, Brenda Delgado seemed like she was gonna have a very normal life. She was shy, sweet, and very smart. By By the summer of 2012, Brenda was a dental assistant in Dallas, Texas when she met her dream man, Ricky. Ricky was the total package. He was young, handsome, caring, and a doctor. Brenda and Ricky started dating and they really hit it off, but it was clear early on that Brenda was more obsessed with Ricky in the relationship than he was. Within 3 months of dating, she asked to move in together. Brenda really liked that she was dating a doctor, and she really liked that her boyfriend made a lot of money. Brenda thought that she was entitled to extravagant gifts, fancy dinners, and luxurious vacations. Brenda was also a very jealous girlfriend. She was always accusing him of cheating. If he was ever nice to a girl, she would say it was flirting, and she was convinced that everyone wanted her man. Ricky was also super close with his family, and they all hated Brenda. There was just too many red flags for Ricky, so about 2 years into the relationship, he broke up with Brenda. And Brenda was devastated, but she was determined to get Ricky back by any means necessary. Brenda secretly had a copy of Ricky's keys, and she would let herself into his apartment whenever he wasn't home. She got all of his passwords, his info, his schedule, and Brenda starts full-on stalking her ex-boyfriend Ricky. She hacked his email, his social media accounts. She was reading all of his messages. When Ricky got on dating apps and dating websites, Brenda hacked into his profile, and then anytime Ricky would get a message from a girl that was interested in him, Brenda would delete the message before Ricky saw it, so he thought that he wasn't getting any matches. Brenda somehow hacked into Ricky's Find My iPhone app, and now she's tracking him anywhere he goes. And then she starts just showing up anywhere Ricky was. His workout classes, Ricky would run into Brenda. At the grocery store, Ricky would run into Brenda. They started running into each other so often that Ricky convinced himself that it was fate and that they should just get back together. So they dated for a little bit longer, and then he broke up with her again. And Brenda just keeps on stalking him, following his every single move because she's convinced that he's meant to be with her. Until Ricky got a new girlfriend. And Dr. Kendra Hatcher was the total package. She was a dentist from Dallas. She was beautiful, smart, caring, and selfless. Kendra was extremely successful, but she was so humble and selfless that she would provide free dental care to people that couldn't afford it. Kendra even went to different countries to give people free dental care. Kendra was exactly what Ricky was looking for in a partner. When they started dating, they both fell for each other so hard. Even Ricky's family loved Kendra, which was the exact opposite reaction that they had when they met Brenda. Ricky and Kendra went on these beautiful vacations. They went to really nice dinners, and Brenda was watching it all because at this point, she's not just stalking Ricky, Brenda's also stalking his new girlfriend, Kendra. And Brenda's completely obsessed with Kendra. She thinks that Kendra stole her life, that Kendra's living the life that Brenda was supposed to be living with Ricky. And Brenda just snaps, and she thinks that if she can get Kendra out of the picture, that Ricky would take her back. But Brenda starts planning Kendra's murder. Brenda goes to a low-income area thinking she can find someone that will kill Kendra for her for money or substances. And Brenda actually finds 2 people that are willing to kill Kendra for her. And I don't know where to put this, so I'm just gonna say it here. For some reason, Brenda tells these people that she's a member of the cartel. But anyways, Brenda hires a single mom named Crystal Cortez and also a wannabe pimp named Christopher Love to kill Kendra. Both agree to kill Kendra for Brenda, and in exchange, Brenda said that she would give $3,000 to Christopher and $500 to Crystal. That's what this beautiful woman, Kendra's life, was worth to these 3 people. So then they start planning the murder. Brenda and Crystal borrow a car from one of Brenda's friends. Plan is Crystal's gonna be the getaway driver in Brenda's friend's car. Christopher is gonna pull the trigger, and that day, Brenda's gonna have dinner plans with friends, so she has an alibi. And then on September 2nd, 2015, Crystal and Christopher are waiting in Kendra's apartment building complex parking lot. And then when Kendra pulls up and gets out of her car, Christopher gets out of his car, he goes up to Kendra, and then he shoots her in the head, killing her instantly. He also stole her purse so they could stage it as a robbery gone wrong. And at that exact same time, Ricky's already up in Kendra's apartment waiting for her. But she's taking such a long time that Ricky decides to go check on her, and he just stumbles upon the crime scene. And an officer told him that his girlfriend's been murdered in an armed robbery. The very next day, Ricky and Kendra were supposed to go on a vacation together, and then when they got got back, they planned on moving to California together so they could be near Ricky's family. And Ricky is absolutely devastated and confused by this news. The first thing he does is he calls his sister for support, and then afterwards he actually reaches out to his ex-girlfriend Brenda for some support. And Brenda actually went over to Ricky's house to help comfort him right after being the one that had his girlfriend murdered. The parking lot CCTV captured footage of the getaway driver, the car, and also the shooter, and they released all those images to the public. And imagine the shock that Brenda's friend had when he saw that his car that he let his friend Brenda borrow was used in a murder. Luckily, he did contact the police. So the police now know that Brenda and Crystal were involved in Kendra's murder, and they actually reach out to Ricky and say, hey, we have this woman, Brenda Delgado, and we think that she's involved in your girlfriend's murder. Do you know her? And of course, Ricky's like, oh my God, that's my ex-girlfriend. I couldn't even imagine what was going through his head in that moment. During Brenda's interrogation, she played dumb. She denied any involvement. She even tried to flirt with the detective that was questioning her to try and get out of everything. They questioned her for a while, but she would not crack, and eventually they had to let Brenda go because they didn't have anything to hold her. Shortly later, Crystal and Christopher both confess, and they're charged with murder, and they say that Brenda was the mastermind behind the entire thing. So when the police go to arrest Brenda, they can't find her because she fled the country, and they couldn't find her for over 6 months. Brenda was placed on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, and she was actually the 9th woman in history to ever be put on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. They also put out a $100,000 reward for information resulting in her arrest, and within 2 days of the reward going out, Brenda was caught and arrested in Mexico. Crystal pled guilty as part of a plea deal where she would testify against Brenda and Christopher, and she was sentenced to 35 years in prison. She was a single mom to, I believe, a 1-year-old son at the time, so she just left him without anyone. For pulling the trigger, Christopher was sentenced to the death penalty, and for planning the entire thing and also being the one to hire them, Brenda was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Please let me know all your thoughts on this one because I really need to know. And if you watched the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to Kendra Hatcher's story. I know this was a long one. I know I've been doing a lot of really long videos lately, so if you made it to the end, that means the world to me. Drop I don't know, red emojis in the comments so I know that you guys made it this far. While you're in the comments, please let me know all your thoughts and opinions on this case, and while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that I covered this case, and I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
I hate when I hear terrifying stories like this one where someone commits a brutal crime and then seemingly just vanishes into thin air, leaving behind no answers. Take this one for example. These two parents killed in their own home. Their dismembered bodies were found neatly cut and washed inside their fridge. But that's not all. Down in the vegetable drawer in the very same fridge were their heads, and soon their organs would be found in a nearby sewer. The only suspect, their own son. But the crazy part is that he seemingly vanished into thin air after doing this horrendous act, and to this day, he has never been found. This is the murder of Fred and Edwina Rogers, otherwise known as the Icebox murders. This is one disturbing case that contains a lot of graphic details, so if you need a trigger warning, this is it. And the fact that this is still technically unsolved really creeps me out, so let's talk about it. This is Fred and Edwina Rogers. In 1965, they lived in Houston, Texas with their 42-year-old son named Charles Rogers, and they seemed to be just a normal, happy family. Charles was described as an incredibly smart man. He had a Bachelor of Science degree in nuclear physics, and he was a pilot in the United States Navy during World War II. He also served in the Office of Naval Intelligence, and he could speak 7 languages. So overall, a really smart man. After the war, Charles became a seismologist and worked for Shell Oil for 9 years. That is until he suddenly quit his job without any explanation in 1957. I think this is where his troubles really began, and no one knew it at the time, but just a few years later, his parents would be brutally murdered, and he would quickly become the #1 suspect. By 1965, Charles had moved in with his mom and dad, Fred and Edwina, and he became a recluse. He would really only communicate with his parents by slipping notes under his bedroom door, and he would only ever leave the house before dawn or after dark, so most of his neighbors didn't actually know that he lived there with his parents. This brings us to June 23rd, 1965. Houston police were called to the Rogers home to conduct a welfare check after days of no contact. Their extended family began to worry, so they called the police to check on them, thinking it would all just be a big misunderstanding. But when police knocked on their door, there was nothing but silence inside, and after getting no response, investigators forced their way in. Immediately upon scanning the scene, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. There was some old food sitting out on the dining room table, but that was about it. As they were about to leave, one of the police officers got this gut feeling to open their fridge, so he did, and what he saw is something straight out of a horror movie. Upon opening the fridge, the officer saw several cuts of washed, unwrapped meat neatly stacked on the shelves. At first glance, he thought that the meat came from a butchered hog, but just as he was about to close the fridge door, he looked down. Inside, and sitting inside the vegetable drawer, were two dismembered human heads looking out at him. It was clear they belonged to Fred and Edwina, and what was thought to be hog meat was actually their dismembered limbs and torsos. Police later found their organs in a nearby sewer. They had been removed, cut up, and flushed down a toilet in the home. What's crazy is that the rest of their remains were never found. An autopsy found that Fred was bludgeoned to death with a claw hammer, and his eyes had been gouged out. His private area had also been completely removed. It was found that Edwina had been beaten and shot once, execution style, in the head, and police discovered that their bodies had then been dismembered in their upstairs bathroom. It was clear to the medical examiner that whoever did this had at least some knowledge of anatomy, so then the question became, who would do this? That's when their focus landed on Charles, their 42-year-old son who also lived in the home with them. But what's weird is that Charles was seemingly missing from the scene, so you would think that with the gruesome nature of this crime, that the house/crime scene would be a bloodbath, but surprisingly it wasn't. It appeared to have been heavily cleaned after the murders, but what little blood they did find led to Charles's bedroom. Police then found a blood-stained keyhole saw in his bedroom, but again, Charles was nowhere to be found. Police had their suspicions that he was involved in the murder of his parents, but they still had to locate him, thus began a massive search for Charles. Police even issued a warrant to find him, claiming that he was just a witness to the crime so as not to scare him off. But after extensively searching, no trace of Charles was ever found. Within 10 years, authorities would pretty much give up on finding him, and in 1975, he was legally declared dead, and as of today, he remains the only suspect in these murders. So although we don't know why Charles would do this or what happened to him after the fact, there are a few theories. Theory number one is really only a baseless conspiracy theory that was made up by a couple of authors. They believe that Charles was an undercover CIA operative and that he was one of the two shooters involved in the assassination of JFK. They believe that he killed his parents because his mom found out about this secret, so he killed them to keep her quiet. Police have found absolutely no evidence of this, and what was done to his parents was straight up overkill, so this theory is widely disregarded. Another baseless conspiracy theory is that he killed his parents because they had abused him well into adulthood. There were rumors that Fred and Edwina were con artists, and they would illegally gamble and commit fraud. The theory is that they were stealing large sums of money from him, which caused him to snap and brutally murder them. Part of this theory is that he moved to Mexico after committing this crime, and was hidden by some powerful people that he met throughout his career. I think this theory is also pretty unlikely to be true, but the only thing sort of backing it up is that a high-profile politician and attorney who have never been named have stated that they both saw Charles in Honduras after the murders. This theory ends with him being killed over a money dispute over there. However, again, police have found no proof of this outside of those witness testimonies. Some people believe that Charles was obviously involved in something really bad in the months before the murders took place. They believe that because he was known to be an extreme recluse, that when he would leave the house only after dark, that he was hanging out with some really bad people, and that this was the start of his mental health declining, ultimately leading to the brutal murders of his parents. It's just crazy to me that it's been 60 years and no trace of him has ever been found, especially after how gruesome this crime was. You'd think he would leave behind some evidence that would help locate him. This is one of the most disturbing cases I have ever read about, and I hate that something like this can go unsolved for so long, that so many years have passed and there are still zero answers. But it's now been 60 years, and whatever happened to Charles and his motivation for snapping and committing this horrifying crime remains a mystery.
It's what Unknown Number on Netflix didn't tell you, and the last detail, I can see why. Now, this crazy new documentary on Netflix you do need to see. If you haven't seen it already, I would definitely recommend it. It's essentially about a high school catfish that was harassing these kids called Lauren and Owen from Michigan. He basically got bullied for years online, and nobody knew who was behind these honestly really shocking text messages. Like, I can't even repeat them on here because they're so bad. It was huge. It wasn't just like a school investigation. They actually got the FBI involved in everything. And the real culprit behind these texts was equally wild. I won't spoil it if you haven't seen it. Go and watch it. Let me know what you think. So Netflix obviously can't include absolutely everything in like a 1.5 hour documentary, but a couple of things I felt were really key that they did miss out. So when the kids first started getting harassed, Owen actually suggested to Lauren that they split up and see if the text stopped. And Kendra actually encouraged the pair of them to get back together, which I feel is really wild. She was adamant, like, you need to stop listening to these messages, you guys need to be together. She once apparently even spotted that they weren't sitting together at a sports game and sent her daughter a really vile message, basically saying, get your ass over there now. I actually knew this case before I watched, so it did kind of ruin the documentary for me, but they did a really good job of keeping the viewers guessing all the way along. Obviously, this was for the drama of the whole thing and like a big final revelation, which was executed really well in my opinion. But the reality was a lot of people from the get-go did suspect Kendra. Some of the parents at school, including Chloe's parents, and some of the staff at school as well. She was just acting pretty sus. She had 2 phones, and she also seemed very preoccupied with her phone constantly. People called her obsessive over her child, and they said that she probably would have enjoyed the attention of the whole thing. Chloe's mom Tammy even went to the police themselves to say, you need to look into Kendra. I don't know if she gave specifics, she just had this hunch about her, but I can kind of see why Netflix kept that quiet.
Imagine it's your last day working at the Empire State Building, and then a plane crashes into it. That's what happened to Betty Lou Oliver on July 28, 1945. Headed to Newark Airport, the pilot was disoriented by thick fog and mistakenly took a right instead of a left after the Chrysler Building, leaving him flying directly over Midtown Manhattan. By the time he could see the Empire State Building, it was too late. The plane crashed into the north side of the building between the 78th and 80th floors. The impact ripped apart the plane, sending out debris and causing the fuel tanks to explode into a fire. The 3 people in the plane, along with 11 others in the building, died, and an additional 24 people were injured, including elevator operator Betty Lou Oliver. Rescuers placed the badly burned Betty into an elevator to transport her to safety. That's when the elevator cables, which had been damaged during the crash, snapped, and she fell 75 stories down. When rescuers went to collect her body from the mangled elevator in the building's basement, they were shocked to find she was still alive, though severely injured. And to this day, she holds the world record for the longest survived elevator fall.